December 1945. Winter did not arrive all at once, it crept in quietly. At first the nights grew sharper, then the mornings followed. Frost began to cling to the edges of windows and door frames, thin white lines that caught the light before sunrise. Inside the wooden barracks, 247 Japanese women lay awake long before the bell rang at 6:30 a.m. Sleep came lightly to them, it always had. Years of air raid sirens, hunger, and fear had trained their bodies to remain alert even when exhaustion demanded rest. They rose quietly from their beds, careful not to disturb one another. Blankets were folded with precision. Simple gray dresses were smoothed. Hair was tied back neatly the way they had been taught long before the war began. Even in captivity, discipline remained. Outside, the compound stirred to life. American guards changed shifts. Boots crunched across frozen ground. Trucks rolled past carrying supplies. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played softly. The women did not yet understand why the music sounded different. They only knew that something in the air had changed. It began with lights. Small bulbs appeared along the edge of the recreation hall roof. Red, green, yellow, they glowed softly against the gray winter sky, faint at first, then brighter as evening fell. The women noticed immediately. Lights were not necessary. Lights served no military purpose. At first they assumed the bulbs were temporary. Inspection equipment, perhaps some kind of signal, but the lights stayed. The next day, paper decorations appeared taped inside the mess hall windows, stars cut from thin colored paper, long chains looped carefully along the walls. Ko noticed them while carrying trays back toward the kitchen after lunch. She slowed her steps without realizing it, her eyes lingering on the unfamiliar colors. Color had been rare during the war. Everything had been gray, brown, burned. These decorations felt unnecessary, and unnecessary things were dangerous. Later that same afternoon, Ko saw two American soldiers carrying bundles of pine branches across the compound. They laughed as needles scratched their uniforms. One sneezed and cursed softly. The other laughed harder and clapped him on the shoulder. Ko stopped walking. She stood near the hospital ward entrance, a stack of folded linens pressed against her chest, watching from a distance. The soldiers struggled to fit a tall evergreen tree through the doorway of the recreation hall. The branches scraped against the wooden frame, shedding needles onto the floor. One soldier suggested cutting it shorter. Another shook his head and said it had taken too much effort to give up now. They argued, laughed, tried again. Ko felt her stomach tighten. These men were relaxed, too relaxed. Enemies were not supposed to behave like this. She had been taught that American soldiers were cruel, animalistic, incapable of restraint, that they mocked suffering, that they enjoyed humiliation. But these men were arguing about the height of a tree. Ko turned away quickly as if she had been caught doing something wrong. That evening, inside the barracks, the women gathered in small clusters after lights out. Their voices were low, careful. Fumiko spoke first. "This is deliberate," she said firmly. "They want us to see this." Tomoko, older than most of the women, sat on her bed with her hands folded neatly in her lap. "See what?" she asked. "Their victory," Fumiko replied, "their comfort, their joy while we remain prisoners." Yuki lay on her side, staring at the wooden wall. "I heard the word Christmas on the radio today," she murmured. "They sounded happy." "Happiness does not exist in war," Fumiko snapped. "This is theater." Ko remained silent. She sat cross-legged on her bed, tracing the seam of her blanket with her fingers. She remembered the warnings she had heard before capture. Americans will pretend to be kind. They will smile before they harm you. They enjoy breaking spirits. She had believed those warnings. They had helped her survive, and now those same warnings felt incomplete. The decorations continued. By mid-December, the recreation hall had transformed. The evergreen tree stood tall at the center of them, decorated with reflective ornaments that scattered light softly across the walls. Paper chains looped along the windows. Candles rested unlit on ledges. At night, the lights glowed. The women avoided looking directly at them. Looking made the unease worse. On December 23rd, the translator delivered an announcement. There would be a gathering the following evening. Attendance was optional. There would be food, music, and small gifts. The word gifts rippled through the barracks like a dropped object. "Gifts for prisoners of war." Yuki sat up abruptly. "Gifts for us," she whispered. Fumiko stood, her face hard. "This is manipulation," she said. "They want us grateful. They want obedience." Ko felt a familiar tightness form in her chest. She had worked as a nurse throughout the war. She understood psychological pressure. No occupying force wasted resources without intent. That night, sleep came slowly. Ko lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the camp. A door closing, boots crunching on frost. A distant laugh. She thought of her mother. The last letter had arrived weeks earlier. The paper had been so thin she could nearly see through it. "We are fortunate if we eat once each day." Ko imagined her family huddled together for warmth, burning scraps of wood in a broken stove, and now she was being invited to a celebration. The contradiction made her feel ill. December 24th arrived cold and clear. The women prepared carefully. Grey dresses were smoothed, shoes polished as best they could, hair tied back with disciplined precision. They moved toward the recreation hall in small groups, shoulders tense against the cold. Outside, the compound glowed, lights reflected off frost-covered ground. The recreation hall windows shone warm and yellow, spilling light onto the snow-dusted earth. Music drifted into the cold air. Not martial music, not an anthem, something gentle, something unfamiliar. Inside the hall, the women stopped short. The tree stood at the center, taller than anything Co had ever seen indoors. Ornaments caught the light and scattered it in soft flashes of red and gold. The scent of pine filled the room. Tables had been arranged neatly. American soldiers stood along the walls, not guarding but waiting. Their posture was relaxed, almost uncertain. A group of soldiers at the front lifted instruments. A trumpet, a violin, a small drum. They began to play. The sound flowed through the hall, warm and measured. Some of the women stiffened, others stared openly, unable to hide their disbelief. This was not mockery, this was not intimidation, this was celebration. The translator stepped forward. "This is Christmas," he explained quietly. "A holiday many Americans observe. It marks the birth of Jesus Christ. It is a time for family, generosity, and peace." Peace, the word settled heavily in the room. Co felt her throat tighten. Peace felt dangerous. The commander stepped forward next. He spoke briefly. He said the year had brought suffering on all sides. He said tonight was not about victory. He said it was about recognizing shared humanity. His voice carried no triumph. If anything, he looked uncomfortable. Then the gifts were brought out. Small boxes wrapped in bright paper, tied with ribbon, one placed carefully in front of each woman. The room grew silent. Co stared at the box. It was light, too light to hide cruelty. Her hands trembled as she lifted it from the table. She untied the ribbon slowly. Inside was a bar of soap wrapped neatly in paper, a simple comb, a pair of thick socks, a chocolate bar, nothing extravagant, nothing humiliating, just useful things, human things. The scent of the soap rose immediately. Clean, floral. Co closed her eyes. For a moment she was no longer in the camp. She stood in her mother's garden in Osaka, cherry blossoms drifting through the air, her vision blurred. Around her, quiet sounds filled the hall, soft crying, shaky breaths. Yuki stared at her chocolate bar. "I have not seen this since before the war," she whispered. Tomoko touched the mirror carefully, running her fingers along its edge. "They wrapped it," she murmured. "They wrapped it like a gift." Fumiko did not open hers. She sat rigid, jaw clenched, staring straight ahead. Food followed, soup warm and thick. Bread soft and white, meat tender and steaming. The women ate slowly. Some could not finish. Others ate everything and cried as they did so. American soldiers watched quietly from the edges of the hall. No laughter, no commentary. They let the women take their time. When the gathering ended, the women returned to the barracks in silence. That night, sleep came unevenly. Barracks buzzed with quiet debate. Fumiko paced the floor. "They want us grateful," she insisted. "They want us to forget Tokyo." Tomoko sat on her bed, calm. "Perhaps this is simply how they treat people," she said. Yuki shook her head. "They burned our cities," she said. "How can this be real?" "Because people are not one thing," Tomoko replied. "Neither are nations." Ko listened without speaking. She placed the bar of soap carefully inside her trunk. She did not know why, but it felt important. The soap remained inside Ko's trunk for several days. She did not use it. Each morning as she dressed, she glanced at the small wooden box at the foot of her bed. She knew exactly where the soap rested, wrapped in thin paper, its faint floral scent barely detectable through the wood. It felt wrong to use it, not because it was forbidden, not because anyone had told her not to, but because using it would mean accepting something she did not yet understand. Around her, the barracks slowly returned to routine. The decorations in the recreation hall remained through the end of December. The lights continued to glow softly in the evenings. Music still drifted from the radio on occasion, but the mood among the women had changed. Christmas had passed, yet its presence lingered like an unanswered question. The first change appeared at meals. The women still lined up quietly, bowls held close to their chests, but now they hesitated before eating, not because they feared poison, but because each bite carried weight. Ko noticed it during breakfast one morning. Oatmeal steamed gently in her bowl, a slice of bread rested beside it, spread with jam. She lifted her spoon, then paused. Across the table, Yuki stared at her own food, her hands resting motionless in her lap. "What is wrong?" Ko asked quietly. Yuki swallowed. "My brother liked jam," she said, "before the war." Ko lowered her spoon. The thought struck her suddenly and sharply. Somewhere in Japan, children were scraping the bottom of pots. Families were boiling weeds for soup. Mothers were dividing single bowls of rice water among several mouths, and here they were, warm, fed, clean. The guilt crept in slowly at first. A tightness in the chest, a heaviness behind the eyes, then it grew. By early January it had settled over the barracks like an invisible fog. The women did not speak of it openly at first. They did not need to. It appeared in small behaviors. Food pushed away half-eaten. Blankets pulled tighter as if warmth itself was shameful. Eyes lowered when American guards passed. Ko tried to focus on her work. She had been assigned to the camp hospital, assisting American nurses with basic tasks. Folding bandages, cleaning instruments, organizing supplies. The work was gentle compared to what she had known during the war. No screams, no triage decisions that ended lives, no desperate shortages. The American nurses treated her calmly, respectfully. They showed her how to use equipment she had only read about before the war. They explained procedures patiently, repeating words until she understood. One nurse, Helen, often smiled at her. "You are very careful," Helen said one afternoon, placing a tray beside Ko. "That is a good quality." Ko nodded, unsure how to respond. Praise felt unfamiliar. During the war, praise had been rare and conditional. Here it came freely. That unsettled her. One afternoon in early January, Ko returned to the barracks after her shift and found Yuki sitting on her bed, holding a letter. Her hands trembled. "It came today," Yuki said softly. Ko sat beside her. "From your family?" she asked. Yuki nodded. "They were alive." She exhaled shakily. "But they are starving." Ko felt the familiar tightness return. Letters from Japan arrived slowly, carried across oceans and filtered through occupation authorities. When they came, they carried news the women already feared: hunger, illness, homelessness. Ko's own letter arrived 2 days later. She recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. It had changed. Once graceful and steady, the lines now wavered across the page. "My dear Ko," it began, "we learned that you are alive and held in America. This brings relief and sorrow together. Tokyo has been destroyed. Our home no longer stands. We live now in a shelter made of scrap metal. Your father coughs often. Your brother grows thinner. We are fortunate if we eat once each day." Ko read the letter 3 times, her vision blurred. That evening she could not eat. She stared at her dinner. Meat and vegetables arranged neatly on her plate. She saw her brother's face instead, thin, hollow. She pushed the plate away and returned to the barracks. She was not alone. Throughout the camp, women struggled in silence. Some forced themselves to eat everything, driven by hunger and survival instinct. Others stopped halfway, unable to swallow past the guilt. The Americans noticed. They did not comment. They did not reduce portions or change schedules. They simply continued. This quiet consistency only deepened the conflict. If the kindness had been fleeting, the women might have dismissed it as a trick. But it was not fleeting. It endured. The first heated argument erupted one night after lights out. Fumiko stood near the center of the barracks, arms crossed tightly. "You are forgetting who you are," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the quiet. "You are letting them soften you." Yuki sat upright on her bed. "They are feeding us," she replied. "Is that softening?" "Yes," Fumiko snapped. "That is exactly how it works. They make you grateful, then they own you." "Own us how?" Ko asked quietly. Fumiko turned toward her. "By shaping how we remember this war," she said, "by making themselves look humane while our nation looks cruel." Tomoko spoke next, her tone calm. "Perhaps our nation was cruel," she said. The room went still. Fumiko's eyes flashed. "Careful," she warned. Tomoko did not back down. "I watched officers beat soldiers for small mistakes," she said. "I watched men sent to die without reason. That was cruelty, and yet you excuse it," Fumiko replied, "because it was ours." Yuki pressed her hands into her blanket. "They dropped bombs on our cities," she said. "They killed civilians." "Yes," Tomoko agreed. "And that truth does not disappear because they are kind here." The argument stalled. No one had an answer that resolved both realities. That was the problem. 2 opposing truths existed at once. The same nation that destroyed Japanese cities now provided blankets to prisoners. The same soldiers who fought brutal battles now handed out chocolate. The women had been taught that the world was simple. Enemy or ally, honor or shame, victory or death. Christmas had shattered that simplicity. In the weeks that followed, small moments continued to erode certainty. One evening, frost covered the barracks windows so thickly that the women could barely see outside. They huddled beneath blankets, breath forming white clouds. At breakfast the next morning, the camp commander made a brief announcement through the translator. "We have ordered additional blankets and warm coats for all prisoners," he said. "They should arrive within the week. Until then, we have increased the coal supply for your stoves." That was all. No request for thanks, no emphasis on generosity, just a statement. Tomoko's hands shook as she lifted her cup. "They notice when we are cold," she whispered. Ko felt her chest tighten again. She remembered winters in Japan during the war. Coal confiscated for the military. Families burning furniture to stay warm, children shivering beneath thin blankets. Her own government had seen suffering and called it sacrifice. Here the enemy noticed discomfort and corrected it. The contradiction gnawed at her. Another afternoon, Ko stumbled while carrying folded linens through the hospital corridor. The stack slipped from her arms, scattering across the floor. She dropped to her knees immediately, heart pounding. In Japan, such clumsiness would have earned punishment. She waited for anger. Instead, she heard laughter, light laughter. She looked up to see an American doctor kneeling beside her, gathering the fallen linens. "Happens to everyone," he said gently, though she did not understand the words. She understood the tone. He was not angry, he was helping. When they finished, he handed the linens back to her and gave a playful salute before walking away, whistling softly. Ko remained kneeling for a long moment after he left. An officer had knelt to help her. An enemy officer. The memory followed her for days. Yuki experienced her own moment. She had been assigned to work in a nearby field, picking vegetables alongside other prisoners. At midday, the American guard supervising them opened his metal lunchbox. He removed several sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. "My wife always makes extra," he said through the translator. "She thinks you girls might be hungry." He handed the sandwiches out casually as if it required no thought. Ham and cheese on white bread. Yuki accepted hers with both hands, bowing deeply as tears filled her eyes. That night she wrote in her journal, "The guard's wife sent sandwiches. She does not know us. We were her country's enemies. How do I hate people who behave like this?" The physical changes became impossible to ignore. The women gained weight. Their skin regained color. Their hair shone. When they caught their reflections in windows or mirrors, some did not recognize themselves. Tomoko stood in the washroom one morning studying her face. "I look like I did before the war," she whispered. Then she remembered her children's last photograph, thin faces, hollow eyes. She turned away, unable to look any longer. The guilt became heavier than hunger ever had. To be well fed while your family starved, to sleep warm while your parents shivered. This was torment of a different kind, not physical, psychological. At night the women gathered in small groups, whispering. Some clung fiercely to old beliefs, insisting kindness was a trick. Others began to question everything. Most existed somewhere in between, too changed to go back, too Japanese to fully accept what was happening. The Americans seemed unaware of the depth of the struggle, or perhaps they noticed and did not know how to respond. How do you comfort someone whose pain comes from kindness? By late January, Ko felt constantly unsettled. One afternoon she caught her reflection in the glass door of a medical cabinet. She froze. The woman staring back looked young, alive, healthier than she had ever been during the war, healthier than she had been as a free citizen. The realization struck like a blow. The enemy had restored her through care. Her hands began to tremble. She slid down against the wall, breath coming in short gasps. She cried, not quietly, not politely. Deep sobs tore from her chest. Nurse Helen found her minutes later. The American woman did not rush to speak. She sat beside Ko on the floor. She did not touch her, she simply stayed. After a long time, Helen spoke softly. "It is all right to feel angry," she said. "You were lied to." Ko did not understand every word, but she understood enough. She understood compassion. Her worldview cracked further. The truth was becoming unavoidable. The Americans had not broken them through cruelty. They were breaking them through kindness, and that was far more destabilizing. After the day Ko collapsed in the hospital corridor, something irreversible shifted inside her. It was not relief, it was not acceptance, it was clarity. For the first time since the war began, she allowed herself to consider a thought she had pushed away for years. What if everything we were taught was wrong? The question frightened her more than hunger ever had, because hunger could be endured, cold could be endured, fear could be endured, but the collapse of belief left nothing solid to hold onto. In the days that followed, Ko moved through her routines with careful calm. She worked in the hospital, she folded bandages, she spoke politely when spoken to. But inside, something was breaking apart and reforming at the same time. She noticed it in her thoughts. She no longer flinched when American soldiers approached. She no longer interpreted every gesture as a hidden threat. Instead, she found herself watching them, observing. They joked with one another. They argued quietly. They followed orders. But they did not worship authority. When an officer spoke, soldiers listened. But they also laughed, questioned, and relaxed when allowed. This unsettled her deeply. In Japan, authority had been absolute. Orders were not discussed. They were obeyed. Here, authority seemed human. One evening, the women gathered in the barracks for another discussion. The debates had grown more frequent and more intense as weeks passed. Fumiko remained steadfast. "They are manipulating us," she insisted. "This kindness is calculated." Yuki shook her head, exhaustion lining her face. "If it is calculated," she replied, "then why does it cost them nothing to stop? Why do they continue?" Tomoko spoke next, her voice steady. "Perhaps this is simply who they are," she said, "or who they are allowed to be." "Allowed?" Fumiko scoffed. Tomoko nodded. "Yes, allowed." She paused. "In Japan," she continued, "we were not allowed to question, not allowed to doubt, not allowed to place individual life above the state. Here, people question openly. They criticize their leaders. They value ordinary comfort. That is not weakness. That is something else." "Democracy," Yuki whispered. The word felt heavy, dangerous. Democracy had been described as corruption, decay, moral collapse, yet here it was, manifesting as warmth, debate, and choice. Fumiko folded her arms tighter. Democracy did not stop them from burning our cities, she said. It did not stop them from killing civilians. Silence followed because she was right. The same nation that offered blankets had dropped atomic bombs. The contradiction remained. Ko spoke then, her voice quiet but firm. Both things are true, she said, and that is what we were never allowed to understand. The room remained still. We were taught that the enemy was entirely evil, Ko continued. That our suffering proved our virtue, but suffering did not protect us. It only consumed us. And now the enemy treats us as if our lives matter, she swallowed. That is what frightens me most. Because if they are wrong about the enemy, then what else were they wrong about? The question lingered in the air, no one answered. By February, rumors of repatriation began circulating. The war was over, the occupation had begun, plans were being made. At first, the women assumed this news would bring joy, home, family, Japan. But instead, dread settled in. Ko lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, what waited for her in Japan. Her mother's letters spoke of hunger and illness, of destroyed neighborhoods and scarce fuel. The Japan she remembered no longer existed, and she would return to it healthy, fed, changed. How would she explain that? Yuki admitted her fear one evening. I am afraid to go home, she said softly. Ko turned toward her. Because you prefer this place, Ko asked. Yuki nodded. And because saying that feels like betrayal. Sachiko, one of the younger women, whispered from her bed. I do not want to return to starvation. I do not want to return to a country that sees women only as tools. The words hung heavy. Some women began asking American officers if it was possible to stay. The answer was always the same. No, international law required repatriation. Still, the fact that they asked revealed how deeply they had changed. These women, once taught that death was better than surrender, now begged to remain with their former enemies rather than return home. The propaganda had promised the Americans would break them. In a way, it had been right, but not through cruelty. Through example, through the quiet demonstration that life could be different. The ships departed in April of 1946. The women stood on deck as the American coastline faded into the distance. Some cried openly, others stood silently, gripping the railings. Ko watched the shoreline shrink. She did not wave, she carried the soap in her bag. The journey across the Pacific took weeks. Conditions were not luxurious, but they were humane. When the coast of Japan finally appeared, the women crowded forward. What they saw stole their breath. Ruins, cities flattened, harbors filled with wreckage. As they passed Hiroshima, the devastation stretched endlessly. A whole city gone, flattened. They docked at Yokohama. Children begged along the pier. Adults searched through debris. Ko stepped onto Japanese soil and felt no joy, only sorrow. Her family greeted her with relief that quickly shifted to confusion. You look healthy, her mother said carefully. Ko nodded. The Americans treated you well. Ko could not speak because she heard what remained unspoken. You ate while we starved. You were warm while we froze. The guilt she had carried in America felt light compared to this. Years passed. Japan rebuilt, slowly, painfully. Ko became a nurse, inspired by her time in the camp hospital. She treated patients with gentleness learned in captivity. She never married. She devoted her life to care. She kept the American nursing textbooks Helen had given her. Sometimes she remembered the night of Christmas, the lights, the soap, the realization. Yuki married an American soldier during the occupation. Her family disapproved. She did not care. She raised children who spoke 2 languages. She taught them that identity could be shared. Tomoko returned to her children and taught them to question authority, to recognize propaganda. Most of the women never spoke publicly of their captivity. The shame was too deep, but privately they passed the lessons on. That the enemy is not always who you are told it is, that kindness can be more destabilizing than violence, that dignity does not come from sacrifice demanded by the state, it comes from recognizing the humanity of others. In her later years, Ko told her niece the story. The young woman listened quietly. So the Americans were good to you, she asked. Ko shook her head. It is not that simple, she replied. They were capable of great destruction and also great mercy. Both are true, she paused. It was their mercy that changed me because it forced me to see clearly. She looked out at the modern city. The lesson was painful, but it was worth learning. That is the story worth remembering because it reminds us that the real battlefield is not between nations. It is between ideas. One sees people as tools. The other sees them as human beings. And sometimes the most powerful weapon is not force, but kindness. If this story resonated with you, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this one.